And welcome to Office Hours by Bit Gardner. My name is John Kowalski. I'm part of the marketing team here, and I'd like to welcome you. Also today we have Mr. Corey Cohen. He will be talking specifically about color measurement tools and uses. If you're unfamiliar with our Office Hours format, it begins with a brief or shortened presentation, usually 20, 25 minutes, followed by an open discussion, open Q&A. Answering your questions, solving any particular challenges you may have at your facilities. So if you have a question or something we can help out with, please log it in the chat box. It should be located in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We are also recording this presentation, and immediately following, you'll receive an automated response with that link. So feel free to check it out later, forward it to colleagues, use it at date night, whatever works for you. So with that, let me introduce Corey. He's our Senior Applications Specialist here and basically our color guru, or one of them. So with that, Corey, it's all yours, sir.
For date night, that's a good suggestion. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today for another edition of our office hours. Today we are discussing color measurement tools and uses, which is, of course, a pretty open topic. So I'm going to have, as John mentioned, a brief presentation, just touching on a few of the different instruments we have and just kind of the specific uses, particularly some of our newer ones, or one of our newer ones that I'd like to highlight. So let's get my face off of there and get started. All right, starting out, so this is our Spectre 2 guide instrument. Hopefully you're familiar with this. This is, a great instrument, very, very precise, very repeatable. It allows for digital standards, which means that two different instruments of the same model are going to read close enough to each other. They're going to read very, very close to each other, such that you can use digital standards, meaning you can measure your standards with one instrument and then transfer them digitally or electronically, email them around, whatever. Everyone who's using or who needs to measure the same target color can be operating off of the same standard, rather than having to have physical standards and ship them around, and all those standards are going to inevitably differ from each other somewhat, and the measurements with the various instruments are going to differ on those standards somewhat. With this instrument, because of the excellent inter-instrument agreement, you can use digital standards where everybody's working on the same target, which makes things a lot easier when you have a big supply chain. What I'd like to talk about now is activate my pointer so you can see what I'm pointing at. So this comes in two geometries, and this is pretty common for color instruments. Sphere, also called D8, and it also comes in a 45-0 model. And so as this is sort of one of our greatest hits, I'm going to talk a bit about Sphere versus 45-0, what the difference is, and why you might use one over the other. How is gloss perceived? So here we have a glossy surface, and all that means is when you have a directional light source, meaning the light's coming from one direction as opposed to all around, like with a lamp with a single bulb or the sun. When that light hits a surface, some of that light is going to bounce off or reflect off at the specular angle, which is this alpha angle you're seeing here. That's where the observer is positioned, and some of that light is going to be diffused, right? And so the ratio of how much light is specularly reflected as opposed to being diffused determines the gloss level of the surface. So here we have a glossy surface, which means there's going to be lots of specular reflection and not so much diffuse reflection. And so an observer observing at the specular angle, the opposite angle of the light source, on a glossy surface is going to see a nice, crisp, clear image of that reflected light source in the surface. And then here we have a matte surface or a non-glossy surface. And as mentioned, that just means that there's less specular reflection and more diffuse reflection. And so that means an observer looking or observing at the specular angle, the reflection of that light source now on this matte surface is going to be much more diffuse and blurry. Really, if it's truly a matte surface, a very, very low gloss surface, you're not even going to see a reflection of the light source itself. You might see a tiny bit of a bright spot, but you're not really going to get any image of the light source on a matte surface because of all that diffusion going on of that light. So gloss not only affects our perception of how shiny or lustery the surface is, it also affects our perception of the color of the surface. As you can see here, we have an example of two painted panels, and they were painted the same color. Each panel was painted the same color throughout, one entirely black, the other entirely red. And then half of each panel was coated with a glossy clear coat. You can see that there's a pretty drastic difference, even in the color between the glossy side and the matte side. And so these two sides that you're seeing here, they have the same pigmentation, they're the same color, but we see them as being pretty drastically different due to the gloss. Typically, we see glossier surfaces as being darker and more saturated or more chromatic compared to their non-glossy sides. And here's the reason for that. So when we want to measure gloss or observe how glossy something is, we might observe it at the specular angle. But whenever we're observing color, we always observe color at a diffuse angle. So typically from straight overhead, you don't want to look at the specular angle when you're trying to view the color, because you're just going to see glare pretty much on a glossy surface. So to view the color, the observer will be positioned normal to the surface. And on a very, very glossy surface, most of that light is going to reflect off at that specular angle and miss the observer, right? Because there's on this glossy surface, there's more specular reflection and less diffuse reflection. That observer is going to get less light reflected into his or her eye. And that's why the glossy part of this surface looks darker to us, because less of that reflected light is bouncing into our eye when we're observing the color at this diffuse angle. And then for the matte surface, we have more diffuse reflection than on the glossy side, and that's why we see that side as being lighter, because we're getting more of that light reflected into our eye. And so to account for the differences, one of the geometries of color instrument, this is a pretty typical geometry that you'll see. It's called 45-0. 45 indicating the angle of the light source. The light comes in at a 45-degree angle. 0 indicates the position of the detector, normal to the surface, 0 degrees. And often nowadays you'll see 45C0. C stands for circumferential, and that's what you're seeing here with this cone of light. So all this light is hitting the surface at a 45-degree angle, but it's hitting it from all around. And that serves to make the readings more consistent regardless of the orientation of the instrument. But so with this instrument, the 45-0, that is meant to sort of mimic the way we see color in real life. As mentioned before, if we have a light source coming in at an angle, you're not going to view the color at the specular angle. You're going to view it more or less straight on at that 0-degree angle, similar to how the detector is positioned. So this instrument, the 45-0, is meant to mimic how we see things, and it measures colors, we say, as we see it, meaning that differences in the gloss or the structure of the surface are going to lead to measured color differences, just like they lead to observed color differences when we look at something. So typical applications for this type of instrument would be comparison to a defined standard. It's just, in general, you want to see how close two surfaces look to each other. Color-wise, you would use a 45-0. batch-to-batch control, and harmonization of various materials and structures. And as mentioned, the circumferential illumination reduces the influence of directionality. And that brings us to the other major geometry of solid color instruments, and that is the sphere instrument, specifically here the sphere spin. Spin stands for specular included. You'll also see SCI, specular component included. Those are the same thing. And so the way the sphere works is that instead of illuminating the surface directly, you have a light source shining light into what we call an integrating sphere. So the inside of this sphere is coated with a white diffusing coating. And so that light bounces all around this surface. And by the time it hits the sample that you're measuring, that light is diffused, meaning it's hitting the sample from all directions. So it's not directional like with the 45-0. It's a diffused light source hitting the light's hitting the surface from all angles. And then the detector is positioned at 8 degrees off normal, hence D8. So if you see D8, you know that is a sphere instrument. And so the difference with this instrument is that because of that diffused light source, because the light's coming from all directions, the directionality doesn't matter so much, and the gloss, the differences that we see due to the difference in gloss is going to be lost to this instrument. And so this instrument ignores any surface gloss, any surface texture, and only measures the pigmentation of the surface, regardless of what it may look like to our eye. And so some typical applications for this instrument are color matching, color strength development, or weathering studies, applications where you may not care so much if there are differences in gloss or texture. You sort of just want to isolate the pigmentation. So it's not that one instrument is better or worse than another. They're just different for different applications. So this is the sphere spin, or the SCI instrument. And then we also have the sphere specs, which stands for specular excluded. It's also referred to as SCE, specular component excluded. And so it's the same as the sphere spin, except with the introduction of this gloss trap. And so what that does is it eliminates the specular reflection from getting to the detector. It removes that from the equation, and it makes this sphere instrument measure more like a 45-0 instrument. And so this way you can have one instrument, a sphere instrument, that can measure both like a sphere and like a 45-0. So the correlation to 45-0 tends to be pretty good on high gloss surfaces, but that diminishes as the gloss gets lower. And so here we have the actual measurements of the two sides of this painted panel as measured by each of these three types of instruments. And we can see the differences that we're getting in the readings according to which geometry we're using. So we're measuring the glossy side against the matte side with this 45-0 geometry, or 45C0. And we're seeing that the L value on the glossy side is much, much lower. So just like how we see the glossy side as being much darker here, this instrument is going to measure it as being much darker. So again, this instrument measures color as we see it. The D8 spin, the D8 specs geometry, that is going to measure similar to the 45-0. So we're seeing significant differences in the L value there as well. But for the spin geometry, this is the one that measures pigmentation. It ignores the gloss or the surface texture. And that's going to measure both sides as being essentially the same. So whereas the 45C0 and the D8 specs saw differences between the two sides, we know that the pigmentation is in fact the same, and that sphere instrument is going to know that also, regardless of anything that's going on the surface. So here we have the red panel, and the readings again of both sides as taken with these three instrument geometries. And so with the 45-0 instrument, again, we're seeing differences in the lightness. The glossy side is being measured as being a bit darker than the matte side. But because this is now a chromatic color, we're also seeing differences in the chroma values, the A and the B. So we're seeing that it is actually the A value is higher, meaning redder, and the B value is also higher, meaning it's getting more yellow color as well. And so it's not just seeing the glossy side as darker, it's seeing it as more chromatic, which again matches with what we see visually. We're going to get similar results with the specs geometry, but again with the D8 spin, it does not care about that surface gloss. It knows that the pigmentation is the same, and that's how it's going to measure it. So that was 45-0 versus sphere. Now we're going to move on and talk a bit about jetness or blackness measurement. So one sort of challenge in color measurement is trying to measure black colors. And the reason it's a challenge has to do with how dark the colors are and how little reflectance there is. So the reason we want to measure black, we all know what black is. It's the absence of color. It's, you know, very, very dark, but there really are different blacks depending on what you're looking at. You know, you can have two things that look black, but when you put them side by side, you can actually see that there are color differences. Maybe there are lightness differences. Maybe there are differences in the hue. So we see this set of panels here. And if we look at each of them individually, we'd probably look at them and go, oh yeah, that's a black, that's a black, that's a black, that's a black, that's a black. But when we put them all next to each other, we can see some significant differences between these panels. Not only do some look darker than others, but some appear to have a hue. So this one on the left appears to have like a brownish or reddish sort of hue. And the one on the right here, a couple of the ones over on the right appear a little bit bluer. So blacks can be lighter, darker, bluer, brownish, and we want to be able to measure that. So as mentioned, black results from the absence or complete absorption of visible light. And so the question becomes, are LAB values suitable to describe black? Because black isn't really a color in the traditional sense, it's the lack of color. And LAB values are used to describe color. I'm not going to get into exactly why, all the reasons they're insufficient. We actually have a webinar up on our website right now, byk-instruments.com. We did a 1-hour web seminar on measuring blackness that you can view for more information. But the answer is no, LAB values aren't really suitable to describe black. We need different ways, different indices for describing them. And that's why there are blackness or jetness indices. There are three main values that are used to describe blacks. Those are the MY value, that's the hue independent black value. So that's entirely based on the Y tri-stimulus value. Y is often referred to as overall reflectance. So this value essentially just tells you how light or dark the black is. We also have MC, which is the color dependent black value. Because this describes sort of the hue of the black color, it takes into account all three tri-stimulus values, X, Y, and Z. And then we have the difference between the two, which is referred to as undertone or DM. And this is more than either of the others. This is the value that's more or less referred to as jetness. So why do we need a special instrument for this? So the big challenge with measuring black colors is that it has to do with signal to noise ratio. So anytime you have an electrical system, particularly a measurement system like this, where you have a photodetector that's translating the light it's getting into an electrical signal, there's always going to be some just random chaotic variation in that electrical signal that's going to cause variations in the readings, right? That's just sort of something you can't ever completely get rid of. And the problem is for black colors, so when you're dealing with lighter colors, just chromatic colors or whites or grays, the reflectance is high enough, the signal is high enough that amount of noise you're getting in the signal is just sort of negligible compared to the amount of reflectance that's being measured at those levels with normal colors and whites and things like that. But when you're measuring blacks, the signal is so low that suddenly that noise you're getting in the electrical signal is a significant portion of the measured signal. And that's a problem because you need to have really, really, really good precision at that very low reflectance level in order to accurately and precisely and repeatably measure blacks. So we developed this instrument that improves the signal-to-noise ratio, partially by reducing the noise using the highest precision electronic and optical components and an adapted production process. We also boosted the signal using LEDs powered with more energy, which means higher light intensity and an extended illumination time. So this leads to an improved what we call jetness mode. So this serves to, because of this, we can measure really, really dark colors very, very repeatably. And this is a repeatability test for this instrument. It's called the Spectre 2 Guide Pro. It's the specialist for measuring jetness or blackness. And you can see here the excellent consistency, the repeatability that you get, even with this very, very, very dark color. So this is this has an MY value of 393, which you'll just have to trust me, that is an extremely dark color. This was measured 50 different times, and you can see the variation here, which you can see looks kind of chaotic until you look here at the actual scale that's being used. And this variation that you're seeing here is actually only a few 10,000ths of a unit. So the consistency is actually very, very good here. And this is what allows us to measure jetness values, measure blacks in a very consistent and repeatable way. And so that is the Spectre 2 Guide Pro, the ultimate way to measure black. Uses an adapted production process using the highest precision electronic and optical components, a special calibration routine, and a temperature stability test on dark gray instead of white. And of course, that improved jetness mode that uses LEDs powered with more energy and an extended illumination time. So this improves accuracy on dark colors. And this was actually developed in conjunction with a partner of ours, Orion Pigments, which is a big name over in Europe, where we're headquartered. And so we, did not consider this instrument good enough for production until Orion did. Orion is known for producing very, very dark black pigments. And so if it's good enough for them, we decided it's good enough for everyone. Okay, that was blackness or jetness. I want to just touch very briefly on one more type of instrument that we make, and that is an instrument for measuring effect coatings. So this is for coatings, paints that have special effect pigments in them, which are often metallic pigments like aluminum flake, sometimes pearlescent pigments, which can cause color shifts depending on the observation angle. And then those metallics and also other special types of pigments like ceralics, luxan, they can cause a special glitter effect in the surface. And so we want an instrument that is capable of analyzing, evaluating all those surfaces. And so the reason we need an instrument for this, a special instrument for this, so here we have, just as an example, this is a solid green color. Solid meaning there are no effect pigments in them, just absorption pigments, just everyday pigments. In this one, so we're measuring this color with a multi-angle instrument, which has multiple measurement angles. And we can see this is a spectral curve, a spectral reflectance curve. And we can see that all these curves for all these different measurement angles are right on top of each other. And so that sort of indicates that it doesn't really matter so much what angle we measure this color at. We really only need one angle, which is suitable for either the 45-0 or the sphere geometries. This is a solid green color. But once we introduce one of those effect pigments, so this is a metallic pigment like aluminum flake. So now this is a green color, but it's a metallic green, meaning there's metallic pigment in it. all of a sudden those different observation angles are seeing drastically different spectral curves. And that's because the lightness of the surface, the apparent lightness, tends to change. When you introduce these metallic pigments, the lightness changes depending on the viewing angle. And so that's why at one angle, at the 15-degree angle, we're getting a fairly light color, and then at 25 degrees, it's showing darker and darker and darker. So each different angle is going to measure a slightly different color. And so when you're dealing with surfaces like this, when you have something with different panels, whether it's your car or boat or plane or washing machine or vacuum cleaner, you want to make sure that all the different panels match, not just at one angle, but because the color or the lightness is changing with the observation angle, you need to make sure it matches at all angles. And so you need a special instrument for that. And so here's another example of a metallic silver. This one is going to have a lot more of those effect pigments in them. You're going to see more drastic differences from angle to angle. So you really need a special instrument to measure this at various angles. And that for us is our BICMAC I instrument, which measures color at 6 different angles. And it also does what we call flake characterization. So it can directly analyze those sparkly metallic pigments in the coating by doing sparkle characterization with 3 different illumination angles, as well as graininess characterization. So I didn't get too deep into that topic, just kind of wanted to bring it out to the front as a topic of discussion. But that is all I have for you today. So let's go ahead and open it up to questions.
Great job, Corey. As always, good information. You explain things very well, so thank you for that. If anyone has questions, please log them in the chat box, bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll get to them. While folks are thinking about questions or comments or anything that they're dealing with at their facility, Corey, can you just run down, a little bit of the industry, or, I know there's going to be outliers, but typical industry standards for what type of instrument to use when? For example, I know 045 is for solid color paint, multi-angle, automotive, or transportation exterior. Can you give us just a sample of, the main, or the 80%? What industries use what?
So for the last instrument I talked about, the BICMAC, that is very widely used in automotive, really any type of transportation, again, boats, trains. So we have some customers who make and paint trains that use that, planes, but also appliances as well. Especially nowadays, you see more and more sort of innovative surfaces and coatings when it comes to things like refrigerators and ovens and things like that really require a multi-angle approach to make sure that look is consistent and as it's supposed to be. And so I did go over this a little bit when I talked about 45-0 versus sphere, but basically with 45-0, anytime you want to make sure that 2 things look the same, you want to use a 45-0, especially when you're dealing with different parts that are made of different materials and may have different gloss levels, but you still want them to look the same. You want them to be the same color. So in that case, of course, the pigmentation isn't as important as how we see it. And since, glossy surfaces tend to appear darker and more chromatic than non-glossy surfaces, it's better to try to match those colors with a 45-0 than with a sphere. Whereas a sphere, if you're worried more about the pigmentation, like with colorant strength. So if if you have incoming pigments, incoming colorants that you use to color your coating or your plastics with, and you just want to know what is the tint strength, the tinting effect that you're going to get with those pigments, you're not concerned with how glossy it is or whatever when you're measuring it. You really just want to know the pigmentation, and that's where the sphere spin really comes in.
Okay, cool. Got a question from Sherry here. What if I'm not sure what instrument to use? Can someone test some samples or my products and help me, figure that out and what's the best route to go?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You can give us a call and we can have a discussion about what product you're making and what your goals are. And we can certainly discuss which would be the best option for you. But yes, we do test samples, for the purposes of determining the right instrument for you. And so if you are able to send us samples, that's always a good thing. We can usually get samples tested pretty quickly with our color instruments and determine which one is the best. And we also have a network of outside salespeople. I mean, they're our employees. They're not, independent contractors or anything. They are Bic Gardner employees, but we have a bunch of our cohorts scattered across the country who can go in and visit you with our color instruments and do some testing on site and see which one is best for you.
Definitely. And we do have several of our field members on the call today too, to help Corey out. If there's a question or something specific to, they have a different perspective of some things also, and some ideas to try and test. So questions. This is your time. How can we help? A lot of expertise on the phone. Okay, got one from Ashley here. How comparable is sphere geometry specs to the 045? Can they be used similarly? Is there a quantifiable deviation between measurements with both of these instruments?
Yeah, I mean, with higher gloss levels, you're going to see larger deviation. So generally, we recommend using the same geometry if you need to compare measurements with a supplier or with a customer. Definitely, you want to, at the very least, be using the same geometry, preferably the same instrument model, preferably a Bic Gardner instrument. But yeah, it is very important to use the same geometry. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a panicked customer who, they took measurements and it's saying this, and their supplier, their customer took measurements, and there's a 20 delta E difference between their measurements, and it almost always comes down to one is using 45-0 and the other is using sphere.
Sounds good. Another question here too, from Lily. What's the best use for black metallic? I mean, we have the Spectre 2 Guide Pro for black. We have the Multiangle for metallic. What's your recommendation, Corey? What do you think?
Black metallic. So probably the Multiangle would be important there, because because of the direct reflection off of those metallic pigments, that reflection is very bright. The individual reflections off of those pigments are very bright and very directional, and that's why you get different lightness levels in particular when you're looking at different evaluation angles. And so black metallics typically would need the Bic Mac Eye, the multi-angle instrument,
just due to those metallic flecks in the pigment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Other questions, folks? While people are thinking and typing stuff in, Corey, are there typical questions that you get when you're on the phone with folks, helping them troubleshoot, or when it comes to selecting, which way to go with an instrument?
No, not a single one, John. Not that I can think of.
No questions. Yeah.
I covered the probably the biggest one, which is the sphere versus 45-0. That's a question that keeps coming up again and again. So it is really important to know the difference between those two, especially when you have, again, a supply chain that's, you're going to have lots of different people measuring colors along the way to the finished product, and they all really need to be consistent. Not only in the instrument geometry, but in all of the different parameters of color measurement, the light source, the difference equation that you're using, all that stuff needs to be consistent in order to be able to compare values in a meaningful way.
That sounds good. Can you talk a little bit about the software that comes with the instruments and how it'll help you, analyze, look at trends over time, things like that?
Yeah, so all of our instruments come with our Smart Chart software. And they each come with 2 licenses. It's not an additional charge. All of our instruments come with the software, so we're not going to sell you the instrument and then upsell you on some more software. But it really is pretty cool in all the different things that you can do with the software. There are 2 different sides of the software. One is called Smart Process, and the other is Smart Lab. So Smart Process is great when you have a production plant where you're going to be doing regular QC type measurements, where you're going to be regularly collecting data daily or weekly and then depositing it into a database. And then you can look at it in all sorts of ways. You can look at historical data and compare that to, what were we doing a month ago, a year ago, 2 years ago versus what are we doing today. You can create QC reports, which are very customizable. You can put your logo in there and all sorts of things. So that's great for regular QC data collection. And then we have the Smart Lab side, which is very versatile in the various things you can do with it. You can take a color measurement, and once that data is in the software, you can really play with it any way you want. Even if it was measured under one condition, you can change the settings, and it will automatically recalculate the data so that you can see it under different illuminants. You can see, maybe you were using Delta E star when you took the measurement, but now you want to see what the color difference is under Delta E 2000. You can change that. All these things are customizable and can be changed even after measurement. You don't need to, if you want to see things a bunch of different ways, you don't have to, take a bunch of different measurements. You can take one measurement and just change the settings and see things in all sorts of ways.
Nice. Another thought too is visual analysis. Looking at samples versus standard under a light booth. How does that play in with using instrumentation?
Yeah, so the point of these instruments, and in fact our sort of slogan, is measure what you see. So these measurements that you're taking are meaningless unless it matches up with what we're seeing visually. So the goal of all of this stuff that we're measuring is to match up with what we actually see. And so instruments are great because it provides a uniformity, a standardization, so that 2 different observers might see 2 different things, and with an instrument you're eliminating that variation that you might get due to a number of different variables that we run into in the real world. But it really all does come down to what we see visually. And so a light booth with standardized light sources can really help you to see visually what it is the instrument's seeing. And so we have a few different light booths. So we have some standard light booths that have different light sources: tungsten, fluorescent light sources, daylight. And so that can help with metamerism. So metamerism, real quick, is just when 2 colors, when a standard and sample may match under one light source but not under another. So it may be difficult for you to understand what's going on just by looking at the numbers in the instrument. And it can be good to have a light booth on hand as sort of a companion to your spectrophotometer that can let you see what's going on actually. We do have a special light booth called the Bico Spectre effect, which is a companion to the Bic-Mac Eye. So just like how with the Bic-Mac, it measures color at 6 different angles, you can actually take your painted panels, your whatever surface you're viewing, and put it inside this light booth, and you can actually rotate it around to different angles, the same angles that are being measured with the Bic-Mac. And so, say you measure a color with the Bic-Mac or a pair of colors, a standard and sample, and it matches under, 15, 25, and 45, but not under the 75 and 110. And you want to see what that looks like. You can actually put it in this this light booth, the Big O Spectre effect, and see that yeah, it matches under certain illumination or certain observation angles, but not under others. So that's a great way to sort of verify what you're measuring using these visual tools.
Excellent, excellent. Other questions or comments? We have a lot of expertise on the phone here, and we have a little bit of time left. Love to answer any of your questions. Also note, you'll get the recording of this, including this Q&A discussion. And also, you know, as part of our seminar series, you'll receive an invite. We do these office hours web seminars monthly. And we also have several other traditional webinars called 60 minutes, and they typically go 45 minutes with a shortened time for Q&A. So stay on the lookout for those. Question from Ashley here. Will the multi-angle measure solid/standard colors accurately, or should it purely be used for the added effect paints?
It can, yeah. So the illumination angle here with the multi-angle instrument is at 45 degrees, same as our 45-0 instrument. And the 45 degree, it's a little weird that the convention is different for multi-angle color than it is for solid angle. Because with the solid color instrument, with the 45-0 instrument, we would call this vertical angle, normal to the surface, we would call it 0 degrees. Here with multi-angle measurement, it's referred to as 45 degrees, but it's the same angle. So the same illumination angle, the same measurement angle. So the results you would get at this 45-degree angle will be very, very close to what you would get with the 45-0 instrument. The one big difference is that this instrument, the BICMAC, is directional. It's not circumferential. And that's by design, because so often the products these instruments are being used on are viewed outside. So it's a single light source, which is the sun. And when you're dealing with these metallic pigments that have this direct reflection off of these little bits of metal flake in the coating, the direction of the light source is very, very important in how you see it, and it's very important in how it's measured. So this instrument is directional by design, not circumferential, whereas the 45C0 instrument is. So that's the one difference where is with this instrument, you could get different results depending on how you orient the instrument on the sample. Even when it comes to solid colors, often we can look at a surface and think that it looks uniform, that there's no directionality to it, but often there is some directionality depending on how it was painted or how it was coated or printed or whatever. There is some directionality there that we can't pick up on with the naked eye, but the Spectra will pick up on it. So the answer is yes, you can use this instrument at the 45-degree angle, and it will measure very, very close to a 45-0 instrument. But you need to be consistent with the direction that you're taking the measurements in.
Good, good. Hope that helps, Ashley. Another question here. What are the maximum standard readings you can store on the Spectre 2 guide? A billion?
5,000? I don't think it's a billion, John. I can't advertise a billion. Let me see real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, 5,000 readings, whether they're standards or samples.
And that's just holding those readings on the instrument, right? So you can download those to the software, wipe the instrument clean, and you're still protecting that data in the software. Is that right?
Yes, there is no limit to how much data you can store in the software.
Oh, it's a billion. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, of course. Other questions, folks? How can we help? Corey mentioned the webinar that's on Jetness. Check out bic-instruments.com for that webinar. We also have a YouTube channel where we store all of our recordings. That link will be sent to you with the recording of this webinar. So feel free to look back at any of our archives and see if anything triggers any questions or anything we can help with. Let me just say too, if you have any questions, later today, tomorrow, next week, next month, feel free to hit reply on any of the automated marketing messages you receive. Myself, one of my colleagues will receive those and we'll forward them, either directly to Corey or your regional sales manager. Question here from Mark. Do you still have support for old models, software-wise?
Yes. We pretty much support old models as long as we possibly can.
Yeah.
We do, if you're referring to one of our Spectre guide or color guide instruments, we do still have the EasyLink software available for those. A lot of people have asked over the years for a version that works with a 64-bit version of Excel, and we do now have a version that works with 64-bit version. So whether you're running a 32-bit Excel or a 64-bit Excel, we have a version that'll work for those instruments. If you're talking about one of our really old instruments that might have worked with the AutoQC software, that software, that AutoQC software, is no longer available, but we do have a newer software called OnColor. That it's the sort of successor to AutoQC, and if you have an instrument that worked with AutoQC, it will likely work with OnColor. So yeah, whatever your legacy instrument is, your legacy BIC instrument, we can probably find a software solution for you.
Sounds good. Had a question from Mark to the Spectre Guide. Where do you find the new version? In the chat, I just put a link to the exact product page. There's a banner ad off the home page, but if you look in the chat, you should just be able to copy or click on that, and that'll open the page you need, and that's all the information about the Color Guide Pro. That's the Jetness one. So let's see. No other questions yet. We have a few minutes left. Jonathan, Ray, anybody else from the field want to chime in on things that you guys have seen out there that may help our audience here? Okay, got a question in here from Lily. Do you have an example of a reading by the BIC-Mac I in black metallic?
Not one that I have available to me now, but okay. If you would care to email me, I'm sure I could provide something. Perfect.
Yeah, Lily, you can see on the screen Corey's email, corey.cohen@altana.com. Just remind him, and we'll go through these questions too and get you the information you need. Let's see, what else? Anyone from the field want to chime in at all? If you have any tips and tricks or information for the folks here. I think you covered about everything, Corey. I can't think of anything else. Anything else come to your mind?
My mind is empty.
Yeah, it's full of color stuff. I know that. I just got a message into software upgrades are online, as well as the firmware releases. So just I think it's in the support section of our homepage. Just go to support and then click on software upgrades, and you can download and make sure you have the latest, greatest version. Ray, did you want to chime in there? Maybe not. Oh, there you are.
Did
Hey,
you
Ray.
hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, I just was gonna say that I think Corey covered everything. I mean, unless we got into like super specifics.
Yeah.
I think it's good.
Excellent. Yeah, if there's any other questions. Oh, just got one in. Thank you, Ashley. You're the attendee of the day. How about that? How are these devices calibrated? You want to talk about that calibration, Corey?
So they're calibrated on a white tile, and then you can check the calibration. They each come with a green checking standard, and so there's a function in the instrument itself where you can do just a check green test, and it will measure it and tell you whether it's in calibration based on the values that are programmed into the instrument. You can also just take a sample measurement. Make sure you're in the right settings, of course. Most of these, the nominal values are given under D65 10-degree observer. So make sure your settings are correct and take an absolute reading of the green checking standard. And you can see whether it's in calibration or not. And the newer instruments actually will tell you whether to calibrate it or not. It will ask you based on things like when the last time it was calibrated, or if there are changing like temperature conditions, it will ask you to perform a diagnosis, meaning a measurement of that calibration standard. And if it thinks it's off a little bit, it will tell you when to calibrate, which actually is not required terribly often because of these use an LED light source, which are very, very consistent, and that combined with the very consistent electronics, you don't have to do a calibration daily or usually even weekly or monthly. You can usually go up a pretty long time between calibrations, and it will stay stable.
Okay, good. We do also offer service and certification on all color instruments, and we are 17025 certified. So if you're looking for that annual certification, feel free to let us know. Eduardo has a question here. I have a Spectre 2 profiler, and it asks me to perform a diagnosis. When I get to the gloss calibration, it doesn't read. Any thoughts on that?
It doesn't read, or is it telling you that the calibration is off?
Eduardo, would you mind if I unmuted you here or activated your microphone? Okay, you're now able to unmute on your end. In the upper right-hand corner, you should see a little microphone in a red circle. If you just click that, it'll turn green, and then we can hear you.
Hello.
Hello.
What does it do? Like, I do the perform diagnosis. When I get to the gloss, I put the gloss, and it says it's too, what's the wording they use? It's too glossy? Let me, I think I took a picture of it sometime. But then I think I contacted one of y'all, and it said to like spray some compressed air in it, kind of clear it. It didn't do anything. Then it's a device I use quite often. What are the options? And it's the only one I have. What are the options of, or what will be the timeline to send it for, I don't know, diagnosis and get it back? If that's the case, or is there anything? Is there like a software update I need to do on the device, or?
Could it be your standard might need some cleaning? Corey, you know better than I.
Yeah, that tends to be an issue with these profilers because of how sensitive the measurement is. The gloss and reflectivity measurement that these things do, it's just very, very sensitive to any sort of dust or scratching or anything that might be either on the standard or on the lenses. So we recommend, first of all, you never want to rub it dry, and you never want to use anything but a lint-free wipe, like a Kim wipe. And so we recommend cleaning it with some distilled water. If necessary, if there are like fingerprints on it or something, you can clean it with alcohol, or maybe alcohol and then distilled water, just to make sure that there's no residue or anything on it. And you can inspect it using a bright flashlight, brighter than your camera flashlight.
Okay.
That's important because it can reveal any sort of dust or particles on it that you may not see, or scratching, which is unfortunate if that happens. But yeah, make sure it's as clean as possible. You can try sometimes, especially with the profiler, because the aperture is a little bit bigger than with our other color instruments. It can be prone, if you're working in like a dusty, dirty environment, can be prone to getting some dust up in the aperture on those lenses. So you can try, you want to take some compressed air like you'd use to clean a keyboard, and hold it not right up against the aperture, because it can spray that chemical into it, and you don't want that. But hold it a few inches from the aperture, and try to knock loose any dust that might be throwing off the measurements. And if all else fails, contact our service department.
Okay, yeah, I think I try all of that, and it still says the same thing. So I found the picture says reflectivity, gloss out of range. Please clean standard. And I already cleaned it, and it's I think I had that device for a year so far.
Yeah, that's a fairly new device. Yeah, we'll contact our service department. We'll also pull this record and give it to service, so hopefully they can contact you before you have to contact them. We'll put a bug in their ear, and we can get this sorted out for you. Okay. So yeah, you definitely need to keep that thing running, huh?
Yeah, I've been using it the way it is, and
yeah,
I just don't know if the readings might be a little bit off, or.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think that's the next good next course of action, and we'll get you sorted out one way or another, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Other questions? We just have maybe time for one more here. Going. Okay. Well, I hope you learned something today. Hope this webinar was helpful. Like I said, you'll receive the audio link from it. Also in that email will contain the link to our YouTube channel. You can check that out for any past webinar recordings, things like that. Like Eduardo, reach out to our service department. We'll get in touch with them too, and have them reach out to you, sir. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to hit reply to any of the marketing emails, or send a note to Corey directly. His email's on the screen here. And just thank you, Corey, for your time, your expertise, and knowledge. We always appreciate you. And we look forward to you guys being on future webinars by Bit Gardener. So thanks for attending today, and have a great rest of your day.